Week 5 of the NFL season is upon us, and we are getting you ready for all of the football action this weekend, both pro, Miami Dolphins specific, and college. Here today on Locked On Dolphins.
You are Locked On Dolphins, your daily Miami Dolphins podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, Miami, welcome to another episode of Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day here on the Locked On Network. I'm your host, Kyle Krabs, a lifelong Miami Dolphins fan, host of Locked On Dolphins, co-host of Locked On NFL Scouting, author of Touchdown Miami, NFL Draft Lead for the 33rd team. You can find all of our shows here on the Locked On Network on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Tip of the cap to our everydayers because it is your team every day. We don't just say it. We live it here on the Locked On Network. Today's episode of Locked On Dolphins is brought to you by FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. You can't hurt me anymore, Miami Dolphins, 2024 Miami Dolphins. I'm deciding that these Friday shows, right, and it was evidenced by you look at where people want to have their conversations around the team right now. And I'm going to do my best to serve and service every subsection of the fan base here on Friday. We're going to look at final thoughts for Dolphins Patriots, which is a game at 1 o'clock at the Dolphins now sitting at 1-3, getting ready to go into their bye week, having they're dead last in the league in scoring offense. There's not a lot of sex appeal around the game. Let's just be honest. A lot of people are not interested in just authentically sitting down and talking about a game plan to beat the Patriots. And the viewership of the show this week on programs that are specific to that versus more big picture conversation around the team seems to suggest that. So we're going to start with that, but then we're going to get into some of the comments that Odell Beckham made yesterday and him speaking to the media as he's potentially looking at getting activated off the PUP. Mike McDaniel spoke to the media this morning. I appreciated some of the self and otherwise accountability that was taken in that press conference. That was the big question I had after the Monday night game. It's like, where's the ownership of what's not working with the team right now? Mike got into some of that and alluded to some of that for the players, which I think is necessary at this stage. And then we're going to look at the college football slate. I have some thoughts on some prospects playing this weekend for those of you who are jonesing for what's next? What's the next wave? What's the next opportunity for the Dolphins to get this thing right? We'll get into a little bit of that as well at the end of the show. But let's start with Dolphins Patriots. The Patriots having two offensive linemen, both David Andrews and rookie left tackle Caden Wallace going on injured reserve. So you foil that with what Miami has been able to do this season with getting pressure. They're one of the top 5 teams in the NFL as far as pressure rate. We seem to have the pressure versus sack debate on an annual basis. And it's really hard to convert pressure into sacks when you're not playing with a lead. I think it's really impressive that the Dolphins defense has been able to post these significant pressure rates when you consider how the game scripts are playing out. And I don't want to overlook that for the job that the defensive side of the ball and Anthony Weaver has been able to do in, let's be honest, the least attractive defensive setting any team has had this season because they have not played a single snap through 4 games with the league. So that's a storyline for me to watch going into this game. Do I think that would I pick the Dolphins to win the game right now? No. They're on the road. They are a complete mess offensively. They keep having the same messaging about execution in the run game and being more physical. And then you go out and you watch the tight ends and the wide receivers that are being asked to block on the edge, and they're not winning their blocks. And you've got reps where Devon Achane, a 190-pound running back, is out there as the slot receiver trying to run the lead on outside run plays and crack toss. And Jonnu Smith's trying to be the crack player on the crack toss. And then you get outside and it's just not perimeter screens with Braxton Berrios blocking starting linebackers for opposing teams. Those kinds of reps, you're never going to win the physicality game there. You're just not. So until they show a little bit more ability to get the right guys on the field for the right calls, because that's been a lot of it, right? There is areas where the Dolphins do not have talent advantages on both sides of the football. I think their depth on the front defensively, when you look at the grading that I've done, and I alluded to the grades yesterday a little bit, but I'm grading every snap, every player on the field above or below expectation. And I'm having outputs and I'm tracking it week by week. Defensively, I think some of the depth players, the depth interior players, Calais Campbell replacing Christian Wilkins, it's not been a problem. The problem is that Christian Wilkins plays 80% of the snaps and Calais Campbell's playing about 60% of the snaps. So what are you getting out of those other 60% of snaps? Well, right now it's either Deshaun Hand, who's a depth option and been okay, or alternatively it's Brandon Peely, who I'm hoping to see a little bit more of in comparison to Benito Jones. And Benito got a little bit more run this past week and it didn't really click. So they got to figure out that rotation as far as the distribution there. I did not think Anthony Walker had the best game, and it was a game in which the opposing team in Tennessee was able to really lean on you and run the football, and a couple of explosive runs were as a result of your front and your linebackers behind it not being on the same page, much like week one, but you had a different starter in there because David Long couldn't go. So what do you do? And on the offensive side of the ball, the last 2 weeks, the guards have been problematic. I actually thought Liam Eichenberg played probably his best 2-game stretch, week one against Jacksonville and week 2 against Buffalo, as a starting NFL offensive lineman. But the last 2 weeks, last week in particular against Tennessee, was Liam's worst game. Rob Jones has been an underperformer all season long. I thought Patrick Paul was okay. You're testing your depth there. You still have Kendall Lamb on the back burner. Teron Armstead was a full participant in practice. Mike McDaniel alluded on Friday morning that both he and Kendall Fuller were potentially looking at clearing the last stage of concussion protocol today, depending on how things go. Okay, whatever. But I can't pick this team to win a football game right now. I just can't in good conscience do it because can they win the game? Absolutely. But the ineptitude on offense, and it's not just execution, as has been alluded to. It's putting players in good positions and asking the right players to do the right things. And I didn't see that the last 2 weeks. So we'll see how they continue to evolve, if they continue to evolve, which is another pain and pressure point for a lot of fans looking at the football game. Now, can you get after Jacoby Brissett, create some negative turnovers and limit long drives and force the Patriots to drive the field and the Patriots shoot themselves in the foot and you win a low-scoring game, 16-10? Yeah. Yeah, you can. This is one of the weeks to do it. But you also thought a week like last week was the week to do it. The defense gave up one drive that went longer than 29 yards, and you lost by 3 touchdowns. Like, come on now. So we'll see. But Odell Beckham talked to the media yesterday. I had some interesting thoughts. We're going to get into some of that a little bit here next on this episode of Locked On Dolphins. Make sure that you stick with us. If you're looking for a little bit of action this weekend for yourself and getting into the game, you can get in the game with Prize Picks. Prize Picks is the best place to get real money sports action. You can join over 10 million users and sign up today. You can win as much as 100 times your money on Prize Picks with as little as 4 correct picks. And Prize Picks is the only real money daily fantasy platform with an insurance injury policy. So your injuries stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. If your player leaves in the first half and does not return, Prize Picks keeps your lineup live. So you can download the app today. Use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly when you play your first $5 lineup. Download the app today. Use promo code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly when you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game. So Odell Beckham potentially returning this week after a stint on the PUP list. And I thought Odell had some interesting comments as far as the start of the season. And he talked about his offseason and where he was at personally in his personal life. He alluded to his kids, business, wasn't sure where football was as a priority at the start of the offseason, talked about the plan he had with his agent, and they originally planned that they were going to sign with the team in season. So then he waited too long to have the knee cleanup. He had his knee cleaned up in the offseason. And then when he said sat down with Mike McDaniel, everybody kind of knew what the deal was, that he was potentially and probably not going to be ready for the start of the season. And I want to be abundantly clear here. Odell Beckham has every right to approach his life and his priorities however he wants. But I look at this from the Dolphins side of things, and I'm wondering how this played out the way that it did, and how this was an answer for a big question that you had if you knew this was the case. And it sounds like, at least according to Odell, he had other priorities to start the offseason. And from Odell's perspective, that's totally fine. You've earned that right as a longtime NFL player and a highly successful one who's made a lot of money. I don't blame Odell one bit. And if he felt this was the right situation for him, okay, cool. Is this just a matter of the Dolphins had more unfortunate luck with River Craycraft going down and Malik Washington getting banged up to start the season? I don't know, but there's this trend where the team has put their eggs in the baskets of players who can't help you to start the season. With Isaiah Wynn at left guard, and Rob Jones has been, for my money, your worst starter on the offensive side of the ball. Rob Jones has been your worst starter. So I guess just hearing from Odell and understanding where he was at, I was a little surprised to hear what his thought process was going throughout the offseason, and for Miami to kind of get to a point where they signed him and said, this is our fix at wide receiver for the wide receiver depth. Because apparently, and I'll read the quote, just talking with Mike, this is directly from Odell, just figuring out where I wanted to go in those conversations I had with him along with some of the brothers I had down here. He was one of the main reasons I came here, that being Mike McDaniel. We kind of had an understanding of probably not going to be ready. He assured me that was fine. Just try to get back as fast as you can. So then we're getting to this, the start of the season, and you got 4 receivers on the active roster. And you're doing practice squad call-ups, and you're bringing back Robbie Chosen after being out in San Francisco, and Grant Dubose off waivers. And I like the potential of Grant Dubose, but he was put in a big spot on a 3rd down against Buffalo and caused an interception, just like Robbie Chosen slips. And I don't know whether exactly he ran the wrong route but he certainly lost his footing, and he and Tua were not on the same page. And that dug you in a hole in the first quarter of a game that ends up spiraling for you, and you lose much more than just a football game later on. And I don't want to blame Grant Dubose and Robbie Chosen for Tua Tagovailoa being injured. That was a snap decision in real time that Tua Tagovailoa made for himself. But the wide receiver spot beyond the top 2 guys, and how teams play those top 2 guys, and how the passing game has not really evolved off of that. And teams are still having success giving extra attention to those 2 guys and not having another answer. And the answer that you did have was a player who you kind of had an understanding when you signed him was he going to be ready for the start of the season. That's a little surprising to me. And that's not necessarily an answer that I would have accepted as the only answer to get me through the first month or potentially longer of the season if I knew that was the case. Maybe that's why they drafted 2 wide receivers, but Taj Washington's a smaller guy. He got banged up at OTAs in some capacity and ends up on IR. And then Malik Washington gets banged up. And then River Craycraft in the preseason goes down. And when it rains, it pours. And not all these guys were guys that had like medical tags on their histories as being concerns as the young guys you brought in. But River Craycraft had an IR stint last year. Taj Washington's not a big guy, and he was a 7th-round pick. So I just thought it was interesting that this revelation kind of comes out that everybody kind of had an understanding that it wasn't going to be the start of the season. And yet it was an answer, or maybe it wasn't deemed an answer, but you lost all your other options as answers. And now wide receiver depth, lo and behold, is a problem again. Until potentially Odell Beckham comes back. And we had a chance to see Malik Washington last week, and River Craycraft at some point is going to be available. And the question is it just too little too late as far as the dynamics of your season? Probably. Maybe it wouldn't be if your quarterback didn't go down, but that's not the world we live in. So that was the Odell Beckham revelation. Excited to see him get out there on the field, see if he's able to do anything to kind of prompt some more opportunities with 3 wide receivers on the field. We'll see. I'm done projecting what could and should be done, because we haven't seen that momentum kind of change yet, right? So you can have all these ideas, but if the decision makers involved, we're just going to stay the course and run the system and maybe add a wrinkle here, a wrinkle there. Okay, let's see how Odell Beckham impacts that, if at all, with any strategy. I certainly hope that's the case for the ability to watch fun football games and have evaluation opportunities with all the players on your team. Because it's kind of hard to evaluate the offensive game tape when everything is 3 and out or 4 plays and your drives are 11 yards and then you punt. We'll talk about the college game next. We got some games, some prospects. Just dropped some rankings over at the 33rd team. It's some of the fan base may be particularly interested in. We're going to talk about that next here on this episode of Locked On Dolphins. Make sure you stick with us. NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get the hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view the live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet at FanDuel.com. That's FanDuel.com, America's #1 sportsbook. So we're not ready to have the talk, but we will introduce the concept. I think everybody agrees the backup quarterback situation, at a minimum, with the dynamics of the Dolphins quarterback situation, is not good enough. And that is probably going to yield just about everybody supporting some kind of significant investment into the quarterback room. Now, what the Dolphins' final draft positioning ends up looking like, what the big picture decision making is with Steve Ross and the dollars that he's committed and extended significant power players on this football team, like the general manager, like the head coach. Like, I want to let all that play out as much as I possibly can. Like, I don't want to sit here in October and do GM and head coach. Certainly, like we got a lot more information to collect and glean before we can make like definitive, declarative, this is what should happen, or this is what I would do type of statements, right? But I think everybody can agree that you whether it's Tua Tagovailoa as the starter or not, and they do have the option to part ways and save the 2026 salary if they do so before March 15th. His 2025 salary is currently guaranteed. But if they wanted to rip the Band-Aid off there and make a dramatic different change, maybe that's more likely depending on draft spots and how they like the quarterback class. I don't know. That's, again, why I want to let as much of this play out as we possibly can. At the very least, a secondary option in the room that's a viable starter is necessary. The team put a lot of faith in the time on task with Skylar Thompson, that they'd be able to call the same kind of offense. Skylar can't run it. My eyeballs work. He cannot run it. He looked worse than he looked in 2022, despite being in year 3 in the system. That's alarming. So over on the 33rd team, I put out my top 10 quarterback rankings. Because obviously every narrative around a draft class is centered around the quarterback class and what exists. There are some options that I'm going to like for the Dolphins, whether it's a day 2 option with Tua Tagovailoa maintaining his role as a starting quarterback, or depending on how big and sweeping the changes are, depending on how bad this season gets, if the team chooses to go completely in a different direction, if they want to accept the sunk cost of the contract extension and go in a different direction entirely and avoid the 2026 guarantees, there's about 5 guys in this class that are eligible that I think can be starting, like viable starting quarterbacks for an NFL franchise. And some of them are playing interesting games this weekend. I would say the 5 that I have, one of them plays in South Florida, Cam Ward, University of Miami Hurricanes. This is currently my #1 top eligible quarterback. He's really, really comfortable extending plays, winning outside of structure. He's not the fastest. He's not the most athletic, but he's got that gene as far as never too much under pressure. He understands where pressure's coming from. He feels it well. He can extend plays. He's fluid enough. He's got a good arm that he can get off script, get off his platform, and still access a lot of areas of the field. And that's the outside of structure element has been the thing that the Dolphins, at least, and Tua this year kind of chased with Tua trying to get more athletic. Cam has that in spades. And I think he's just a delightful talent. Now, does he go number 1 overall in a class that has a couple of really special players? Depends on who the teams are who are picking and whether or not they need quarterbacks, right? Like Jacksonville just gave, without the guaranteed out, Trevor Lawrence $55 million a season. He could be a team with the number 1 overall pick. The New England Patriots could be a team that finishes with the number 1 overall pick, and they just picked Drake May and are looking at the potential of potentially redshirting. So, like, there's worlds where I think QB1 in this year's class doesn't come with the first overall pick, or the team with the first overall pick is a team that isn't hungry for a quarterback. But you also have Shedeur Sanders in Colorado, and Deion Sanders kind of teased with Shannon Sharp and Chad Johnson. He's already alluded to earlier this offseason that he would be their camp, the Sanders camp, would Eli Manning certain teams. And then Deion kind of alluded to Miami from a business perspective with Tua's injuries being a spot that, brought up Shedeur and Miami in the same sentence. I'm sure Deion, as a dad, would love to see his son go play football in Miami as a high-profile, big metro city with a lot of opportunity, playing and throwing the ball to Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. I'm sure he'd love it, right? But Shedeur's good under pressure and duress as well. I don't think he's dynamic as Cam Ward is. And that's why I do have Cam as the number 1 player. I also have Carson Beck up pretty high from University of Georgia. He's a gifted passer of the football. He's really good at the line of scrimmage. He had a really rough first half against Alabama, but then they came on like gangbusters. He brought them all the way back. They were down 28-0. Georgia held a brief lead in the fourth quarter. Much of that on the efforts of Carson Beck, who has to play this year after losing his 2 best receivers in Lamin Conkey and Brock Bowers to the NFL draft. He's not the biggest, he's not the fastest, he's not the strongest, but he's good in all areas as far as good arm strength, good athleticism, good stature, really, really sharp at the line of scrimmage, has good command at the line of scrimmage. I think that stands out, and he's one of those guys who I think the top 3 guys all do this. Working progressions, using full field, being able to access all your routes, and kind of understanding up at the line of scrimmage where you need to go. I'm really fascinated by Garrett Nussmeier from LSU. I think he's the one who probably illustrates the play style that's most parallel to what the Dolphins' current iteration of the offense tries to accomplish as far as ball handling skills, rollouts, throwing with anticipation over the middle of the field. He backed up Jane Daniels last year. He's been at LSU for a while. But this is kind of the first time he's had a chance to be the man. He's putting up really nice numbers. And then Jalen Milroe, who cannot be another Alabama quarterback, but could not be any more different than Tua. Milroe's best qualities are his athleticism and his arm strength, right? And those are the areas that you acknowledge with Tua are the areas that he's sufficient or from his athleticism and extended play standpoint, especially last year, it's just not where you're going to win as a player. But Milroe has shown massive strides. He's playing with the Washington head coach, Kalen DeBoer, as his new head coach this year at Alabama. Of course, he turned Michael Penix from a day 3 quarterback into a top 10 overall pick. And Milroe's got better tools than that. And he just tore Georgia apart last weekend. So who do these teams play? If you're interested, if you're one of the Dolphins fans that's of the frame of mind, like, depending on where you're at, let's invest a significant player and pick in the draft on a quarterback, because whether Tua is here or not here, if he's here, you understand with a routine football play and an injury, you don't want to lose a whole season again. And that's, I don't want to boil it down to being as simple as that, because there's other complicated stuff that's going on with the Dolphins right now that's not just Tua Tagovailoa injury related. But this is a massive ramification of everything that we're experiencing, and why the tone of the season is what it is right now. So Cam Ward and University of Miami are in Cal. They play at 10:30 on ESPN. So it's a late night game. If you're a late night game, maybe you can stay up a little later if you're either going to sleep in and try to get to the start of the kickoff with Miami and New England on Sunday, or if you potentially want to skip it all together, you could. Alabama with Jalen Milroe, they play at Vanderbilt at 4:15. That is an SEC network game. Let's see where we have LSU is off this weekend, so Garrett Nussmeier does not play this weekend. Colorado is off this weekend, so Shedeur Sanders does not play. And then we are missing Georgia, the Georgia Bulldogs. Georgia is playing Auburn at 3:30 and ABC. So from an NFL draft, like top of class perspective, if this is your frame of mind and you are interested in kind of dipping yourself into this pool, Auburn at Georgia, 3:30 on ABC, and then Miami at Cal, 10:30 on ESPN, are the two to watch. My number 6 quarterback plays at noon. That is Drew Aller from Penn State. They're hosting UCLA. And then my number 7 quarterback is Curtis Rourke from Indiana, and Indiana plays also in the 3:30 slate. They play Northwestern at 3:30. Jackson Dart is my number 10 quarterback. They play at out South Carolina at 3:30 on ESPN. So the 3:30 slate is going to have some good opportunities. The noon slate, if you're interested in a big arm pocket passer quarterback who's a little bit more of the traditionalist, all the old school guys are really going to like Drew Aller. He plays at noon against UCLA. So hopefully that sets the table for your football weekend to have some things to be invested in and really interested in. And we can all develop opinions of these players together, because I do think it should not be a hot take, and it should not be controversial. It should be generally accepted, in my opinion. The Dolphins need to be in the quarterback market this year, whether Tua is back or not, whether Tua decides to come back or not, whether Tua decides to come back and the team decides to move on, or if Tua decides to come back and the team says we're going to keep rolling or not. No matter what, Miami needs to be in the quarterback market. And depending on, you never know when a guy might slip, and it might be he falls to you in the second round, or if you pick super high and you fall in love with a guy, you could take him. And then there's all kinds of ways that can spider web out. And the whole objective is to be prepared for anything. It's what I try, is from an offseason perspective and a personnel move standpoint perspective, you try to be prepared for anything. And I think the thing we were least prepared for in this program this year thus far is to be having this conversation on October 4th. But that's the NFL. That's going to do it for us here on this episode of Locked On Dolphins. I appreciate you guys checking out the show. Make it a great rest of your day. Enjoy the weekend of football ahead. I'll be back to talk to you all on Sunday afternoon after Dolphins Patriots, talk about what we saw from an AFC East clash for the Miami Dolphins with their last game before the bye. Go Fins.